Welcome to the fourth episode of Hannah's House of Music. Today's lesson is going to be about the notes, their names, and the number of counts that they get. All right. And we are going to relate this and add on to the lesson how dots next to a note affect the note. Okay, so the notes that we already know from previous lessons, we have the circular one. The circular one is called a whole note, also known as a semibreve. So for anything that has the word semi in it, it means half. You know, like you'd have circle, semicircle, like that. So semi means it's half of something, which we are going to learn at the end of this lesson. But for this lesson, we have a note, that one. It's called a whole note, also known as a semibreve, and a whole note gets 4 counts. The next note, if you split a whole note into 2 equal halves, you would get half note. So a half note would look like that when the stem goes up there, and a half note with the stem going down there. Another name for the half note is a minim, and that gets 2 counts. Now, the difference between this one and this one is that this one has a dot next to it. And what happens when there's a dot next to a note, it alters the value of the note. Because you notice this and that are the same, just that this one has a dot. And just by having that dot, it alters the value. The one with the dot gets more counts. So a dotted minim, also known as a dotted half note, is 3 counts, whereas the half note is 2 counts. Then we have the quarter note, also known as a crotchet, which gets 1 count each. After that, we have a quiver. When it's standing alone, it would look like that. But when they are at least 2 next to each other, they have a beam there. And if the stems are going down, then they would have a beam down this way. And this would be the 8th note, also known as a quiver. And they each get half a count each. But because music is usually in a measure in terms of 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, and the bottom number here is representative of crochet beats as learnt in previous lessons. Please, if you haven't looked at the previous lessons, it would be good to recap so you're not left behind. So mostly you would find that this note would not be standing alone in this time signature. It would definitely be next to another one like that, of which the 2 of them together would fit in that beat. So if the music was, say for instance, 2/4, even if you have this and that, this would still be 2 times. This is beat 1, beat 2. And then it would still work well with, even if the next bar had that, you'd still fit them into beat 1, beat 2. So you do not need to wonder so much how do you count half a count that you've explained here. All right, so that should not worry you. Just remember that one is called a quarter note. The one that follows is an 8th note. And by the way, an 8th note can continue and you would have a 16th note, and they would go all the way to 1/64. So they keep moving and keep moving. So you can get one that has 1 tail, another one that has 2 tails. So you would have, eventually there's that with 1 tail, then you would get another one that has 2, then there's 3, and there's 4 tails. It's another lesson for another day. Now, in relation to what we saw here, how is it that a dot next to a note alters the value of the note? Let's focus on the word dots. The dots are half the value of the note that they are leaning on. So if the semibreve, as we know it, a whole note is 4 counts. If the dot leans on it, the dot will be half the value of that. So what is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. So the semibreve, or the whole note for that matter, is 4 counts. The dot is half of that, which is 2. So which leads us to this answer? 4 plus 2, which is 6 counts. So the note, the whole note with a dot next to it would be 6 counts. Let's go to our minim. When it stands alone like that, also known as a half note, it's 2 counts. So the half note is 2 counts. When the dot is leaning on it, half of 2 is 1 count. All right? Just like if you had 2 pencils, you gave your brother half and you're left with half. That means you would be left with 1 and your brother would have 1. So basically, a minim or a half note is 2 counts. Half of 2 is 1. So together, it would be the minim, 2 counts. Then the dot is half of that, which is 1, which explains why now our dotted minim or our dotted half note had 3 counts. That explains that. A dotted half note gets 3 counts because once a dot leans next to you, the dot in itself borrows half the value of the note it's leaning on. Let's move on to our crotchet. A crotchet is 1 count. A crotchet standalone is 1 count. The dot next to it, half of 1 is half. So half of 1 count is half. If you only had 1 pencil and you had to split it into half to share with your brother, it means you would literally break that pencil in half. And now that explains why our crochet with a dot next to it would be equals to 1.5 counts. And this kind of notes are mostly used when you have times that are in quaver notes. An eighth note kind of a beat works very well with this kind of a note, and this one is usually the one that marks the end of the piece, mostly in 3/8 pieces. So you would have, for instance, maybe bar 1 would look something like that. And there are other rhythms other than the ones that I have been drawing here, so that's a unique one. But if you count that, like these two are semi-quavers because they have 2 tails each. Those 2 put together would still add up to a quaver. But at the end of it all, if you sew this and then you sew that, it would still add up to 3 quaver counts, or if you wish, 3 eighth note beats in a bar. So that's the end of today's lesson. Just remember, when you see a dot next to a note, the dot is half the value of the note it's leaning on. And that's just basically it. That explains the difference between a minim and a dotted minim and why the dotted minim has a higher value. That's it for today. Enjoy your music and see you real soon.